Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of the Ripple Intent Podcast. I am one of your hosts, John Grant, and with me, as always, is Kyle. Say hello, Kyle.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. Glad you're here.
So, for those of you who aren't yet aware, Ripple Intent is a nonprofit building a community of people who are looking to make work a better place. So, we're learning how to be better teammates, colleagues, and partners and bring a more human-centered focus to work. So we have a great guest for you today, and I'm actually going to let her introduce herself. I got acquainted with Jolie a few months ago, where she's done some fascinating research and has um, built a really interesting organization that honestly I'm fascinated with, and would love to have you talk about it today. Because Joe, you've told me you're bringing this sort of into the construction space, but honestly, this really applies to just humans in general at work. So, without further ado, Jolie Wills, please introduce yourself.
Oh, hi. Thanks for having me. And usually the very first thing people notice, especially like this is a podcast, a lot of audio, is the accent, right? So I'm giving people a moment to sort of tune in because I know it takes a little bit. I have a very southern accent, so I'm from New Zealand. So let's get the elephant, in the room out of the way first. But Jolie Wills, I'm CEO for the US for Hummingly. And Hummingly is all about supporting leaders and teams to do big, hard, meaningful things, to do well, be well under pressure. And our background comes from disasters. So we tend to say our career has quite literally been a series of disasters, and we mean it in a way that is very literal. So we've worked in really large scale disasters. So I'm a cognitive scientist, so I'm really interested in the connection between stress and performance. And we've led and supported teams in the most incredibly stressful situations. And so it's all about how do we apply all of that science, learning, research, but in a way that's really useful. It's got to be practical, useful. It's got to work for any human, not just people who are into meditation, all of those things. So it's a big part of our challenge.
Number one, meditation. That's where I took. So yes, I should start it.
It works for some. It's a really important tool, but a lot of people will be like, not me. So, we've got to find things that work for everybody.
For sure. Could you share, because I think I'm fascinated by it. Share a little bit more about your background. So you said you're a cognitive scientist dealing in disasters. Like, give us a little bit more of your backstory. How did
Yeah.
you come to this point?
How did all that come about, right?
Yeah.
So I'm originally, I live in Denver, Colorado now, but I'm originally from Christchurch, New Zealand. And you may or may not be aware, we had a really large series of earthquakes, 2010 and 2011. And just to paint the picture a little, because I think it'll help with the rest of the story, but it was a 7.1 magnitude earthquake followed by a whole series of aftershocks. And those aftershocks were life-threatening, and they could happen anytime, anywhere. So to give you a sense, one of those aftershocks claimed 185 lives. So for 5 years, we were a population in our city that lived under constant threat and uncertainty with 15,000 aftershocks. So at the time, I was leading a team of people who were supporting people in Christchurch, but also supporting a really long and complicated rebuild process for the city. So to give you an idea, 95% of the homes and apartments were damaged or destroyed. So to really help imagine that, just think about Denver and think about your city, your street, your neighborhood, and what that would mean if you had 95% of your homes or apartments damaged or destroyed. We had 75% of all of our horizontal infrastructure, so all our pipes, our roads, our bridges, damaged or destroyed, needing replacement. And our central business district, so our downtown area, was cordoned off for demolition work for more than 2 years. So just trying to imagine what that's like in Denver. It was a huge scale event. And for me, leading a team of people who were impacted and living it, a bit like we've had to over the last few years with COVID, They were impacted living it themselves, but they were supporting a community under incredible pressure through a rebuild. And our biggest challenge in doing the best we could for our community, knowing that this was going to be a really long process, was preventing burnout in the people who were on a real mission to do the best they could by their city. And that was our biggest challenge. How do we prevent burnout? How do we sustain people who are working under pressure? And that's where all this started.
Wow. I mean, that sounds incredibly challenging, and I have a hard time wrapping my head around how difficult that must have been.
So did we, to be honest. It took a long time for us to come to terms with it. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more of the story. So you go from that, right? Serious, like, how are we living through this major stressful long-term event or series of events? Tell them more about how does that lead you to Hummingly?
Yeah.
And then the next step to me is, how does that then apply to people at work?
Yes. Perfect. So as I said, we had a really large team that were working under really prolonged pressure, and they had a really critical role to play, and they were giving a lot of themselves to their jobs, and we were starting to see the impact of that. And as a cognitive scientist, I knew that we had to find a way to sustain people under pressure. I knew it was going to impact their performance over the long run, but also them as humans. And so I threw everything I could think of at this team to support them. We had resilience training, we had, I don't know, walking group, you name it. We tried everything you could possibly think of. And the reality was we were still burning people out. And to me, that wasn't okay. I was starting to see the impacts on them, on their work, on their goals, on their families, on their relationships, on their health, on their mental health. And I remember thinking at the time, well, this is not the first disaster the world's ever had. This is not the first team of people who have worked under incredible pressure for a long time. So what do we need to know and do differently? And so that led to a Winston Churchill Fellowship, which is a global research tour. I was able to visit, and they were disaster teams at the time. So they're teams of people working under the prolonged pressure, that long tail pressure bit, that cumulative load, prolonged pressure, to get a sense of what are the impacts of that. And of course, the impacts we were seeing, we were not alone. As you'd be very aware of, teams and people working under prolonged pressure has really significant impacts, both for them, but also their organizations. And then the second piece of the puzzle being, what do we need to know and do differently? And then bringing that back and thinking, how do we then, as a cognitive scientist, the things that we want to engage in and the things that we want to put in place, when the pressure's on, they have to be easy, they have to be practical, and they have to work for any human being. So, we work with, and I'm thinking about a team in New Zealand, and they were all men, so a group of linesmen in the power company, fertilizer company, so it went from working in disasters to other organizations saying, hey, look, we've just been under pressure for a long time, or we've dealt with, when you think about pressure, financial pressure, pressure to perform, time pressure, all of those things, or uncertainty or disruption in our sector. And we're starting to see the impacts. And a lot of the wellbeing approaches that we're applying just don't feel right to our group of people. And what are the things that really we can apply, no matter who you are? We come at it with we've got all this theory and research, but it's got to be practical. It's got to be helpful, and it's got to be fun. And it's got to be very down to earth in our mind.
Mm.
So, when you talk about, when you're describing that, the chronic pressure, the long-term, the sustained pressure, some people would just call that work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it absolutely is. But it's also, our world is heading more in that direction, sadly. And I just think about, one of the people I interviewed was a woman in Australia. And again, this is a bushfire, or they call it bushfire, wildfire impacted community. And you can take the disaster out of the story and it still makes sense, right? And she said to me, I said to her, how do you explain to people what it's like working under prolonged pressure? And she said, well, it's kind of like being asked to carry this ever-increasing load of bricks. She said, I have a whole lot of things going on in my home life already. I'm a parent. There's a whole lot of family logistics. I have some financial concerns. There's some things going on, right, in my home life. So I have some bricks already. And she said, And my role isn't easy. I'm working with people, our customers or our clients or our communities that I'm working with aren't always easy. We're working under time pressure with limited resources, and so there's a whole lot of bricks that keep getting loaded on. And we've been through a pretty disrupted time in our industry, in our sector, in our community. And so a lot of those bricks are heavier than normal, and there's been a lot more added. And she said, but I keep thinking it'll get easier, right? This time crunch that we've got, this pressure crunch we've got, I think it'll be temporary. So I step up and I carry this really heavy load of bricks, thinking it'll be for a little bit, but they just don't seem to go away. And if anything, they just seem to keep getting added to. And I don't get the rest time to really rejuvenate and to get a break and to build my strength up again. I'm just getting worn down by these bricks. And she said, the thing was, in the next moment, my boss said to me, hey, Anne was her name, I can see that you're carrying a lot. We're putting a lot of weight on you at the moment. Like, I really hope you're looking after yourself. That's really important. Self-care, super important. But I really need you to do 5 more things for me by the end of the week, right? Yeah. So really understanding exactly, what our limits are as human beings. And I talk about the superhero curse, where the more capable you prove yourself to be, the more you attract, until it becomes unsustainable. And just thinking about well-being in the workplace, I talk about a triple responsibility, right? Self-care, the things we can do to support ourselves actually are really important. If we don't put those things in place, things don't end well. And I can tell you a whole lot of stories around that. But there's also a team component where it's amazing how teams can be phenomenal for providing support to each other under pressure. Or when teams get really tired, it's really normal for humans when we're tired to not be at our best selves. And so in that situation, teams can become a bit emotionally tatty, and then teams can become a source of stress rather than support. So thinking about how do we equip teams to be really good teammates to each other when the pressure's on? And then the third piece being, how do we equip leaders and organizations so that, we are really addressing the load and all the things that are controllable? Because there's a lot that's not in our work, right, and in our sector. But what are the things we can influence and control that are going to help people's well-being and their performance, knowing that we can't just keep loading people up in a way that's unsustainable. That doesn't work.
No, wait a second, because what's got my attention here? So many programs, so many organizations in the last decade jumped on the wellness and well-being bandwagon. Are you telling me, because what you're describing, the people, the leaders, the organizational components, those are not usually present in these wellness programs?
Yeah.
Not to pick on them, but I will pick on them because most of them are terrible. They don't actually change behavior or impact anything. But I love it when your example of, make sure you're taking care of yourself. And by the way, here's more stuff to do.
Yes.
How often? I mean, that is so normal. It's like, work-life balance. I'm glad we talked about it. Now get back to work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And good on people for starting the conversation. It's not an easy thing as leaders to balance those things, right? But unless we really address some of the leadership challenges, how do we equip leaders? A lot of leaders are like, I am a technical expert. I got here because I know what it is I do in my sector. I'm really good at what I do. But leading people is not an easy thing, and people are often not equipped and supported to do that and to understand the human pieces that we need to know and appreciate. And so we step into that, and we try with some conversations around wellbeing, but unless we start looking at it as a holistic approach with the individual, the team, and the organization, and it's actually not as hard as it sounds, right? There's some pieces that we can plug and play at all three levels. But if we don't really look at the leadership component or the organizational challenges, the things that are adding stress to people's load within the organization, then it's kind of like sending a canary into the coal mine. And when the canary falls off the perch saying, oh, we need a stronger canary, So people often say it's like gaslighting, like people are telling me to look after myself and that it's my issue when there's a lot of organizational stressors that we're not dealing to. And so I say it's not either or, it's and, right? We need to take care of ourselves individually and know how to put those things in place. We're not always very good at that. And the team piece and the thinking about what do leaders and organizations need to know and how do we make that really easy? Because leaders too are prone to burnout and they've been carrying a lot. Yeah.
The carrying the stack of bricks, really, that spoke to me. I actually used to use two different analogies, and talking about with my wife. I'm like, oh, this is just there's a wave. I'm under a tidal wave at the moment. Once it passes, we'll be okay. But then the space between the waves
Yes.
got smaller and smaller and smaller. And so it just became constant. And then I was
Yeah.
like, oh, geez, maybe I'm just underwater.
Yeah.
The wave didn't pass. It's one wave,
Yeah.
that or is the roller coaster. And I'm like,
Yeah.
the ride will be done shortly and it'll be okay. But now it's turned out it's never stopped.
Yeah.
The same thing.
And that's the challenge, right? I think as leaders, we can equip and support our people to find grit when they need it and to step up and perform under pressure. Like, I don't think well-being is about not having those pressure points, but it's around how do we sustain people in that kind of environment and working in that, way out of our comfort zone, in that where we're drawing really heavily on our body's resources in that stress zone. We can do that and step up and do incredible things. Like, stress is not bad if we manage it well, right? And so we can do incredible things as individuals, as teams, and as organizations, but we can't sustain operating in that space without some strategic rest or some ways of addressing and sustaining people intentionally. So we can get some short-term wins, but some long-term losses, very much so.
Yeah, but that's okay because there's a lot of people in the world. So the ones that don't make it will replace them.
It's
With
amazing
another
how
theory.
often we see that. Yeah.
Right.
It's not a winning approach, but it's amazing how often we see that. Yeah.
It's interesting your focus because you keep bringing up the leader burnout piece, and I don't think that's something that people often think about by any means. So sure, staff and frontline are going to burn out, and that's what the leader's job is, to manage that. But the fact that the leader can burn out,
Yeah.
that the leader
Absolutely.
can experience sustained and chronic stress and pressure, that's a bit of a foreign concept.
And there's so much more being asked of leaders, right? And so we get a lot of people say to us, look, I'm not a psychologist. How am I meant to have these conversations with our people? And firstly, you don't need to be a psychologist, right? There's some really easy tools and frameworks and ways that you can have conversations and support your people. But it's not something that people feel comfortable in because that's not where their training came from. It's not where they feel proficient. It's outside their comfort zone, and they're already juggling a lot as leaders, and it's been a rough, long stretch for them as well. So just acknowledging that, I think, is important.
So what does that actually look like, though? Right? Because if I am the leader, and I kind of want to get in a little bit because you've talked about, and with Hummingly, you have a whole series on leading for well-being. And I can see how that, like, I am taking care of everyone else, but how on earth am I supposed to recognize for the group if I am, as the leader, I am burnt
Yeah.
out, I'm struggling, and how am I supposed to then even get any kind of help from my team? Like,
Yes.
what does that even look like?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the leader, and I'll tell you a story because you've hit the nail on the head there, Jon. Like, there's a story that I tell, and it's about a leader that we got to interview as part of our research, and phenomenal leader. Like, her list of accomplishments, just incredible. We were totally fangirling, and just couldn't wait to meet this leader. Real honor to get to interview her. And on the day of the interview, we got a message from her to say, hey, I'm not at work. I'm actually at home, and we're going to have to do this interview at home. So we turned up to interview her and said, sure, fine. And it turned out she was home on stress leave, and again, this woman with incredible list of accomplishments, nothing to do with how accomplished she was, how professional she was, how clever she was, how, everything capable. She said, actually, I've just been carrying so much for so long. I just hit a point where I hit the wall, and we all have our limit. And I think I found mine. And she said, we said, we can do this another time if not at all. And she said, no, this is more important now more than ever. And she talked us through the impacts that it had had on her role, on her career, on her, relationship, on her health, really significant by this point. And she said the scary thing was I kind of got forced off that treadmill because my body said no more. And when I stepped off that treadmill, I stopped and I turned around and I looked at my team, and I had this really scary realization that I think my team was about 2 to 3 weeks behind me on that road to burnout. And that was a really important message, because I think as leaders, we're often thinking about supporting our people, but recognizing that where we are at influences where we're leading our team to is really important. So as leaders, it's not always comfortable to do the things we need to do to sustain and look after ourselves, but recognizing the connection between how we're doing and how our team is doing is going to be really important. So I always ask the question, where am I at as a leader? Because that's where I'm leading others to. So, I mean, this is a very long-winded way to get to your answer, Jon, but I'd start with, leaders understanding that actually how they're doing is going to influence their team. And then thinking about the pressure points you've got ahead of you, like what are the mountains that you are climbing with your team? And understanding what that means, because you set off to achieve something, whether it's a massive construction program or project, and you set off with this goal in mind, and everyone sets off with a whole lot of energy and the vision in mind, and off you go. And then you typically hit the point where people's energy is running low. People get pretty tired. We call this the grit zone on Grit Mountain. We suddenly, the energy's running out. It always turns out to be longer and more complicated. There's always challenges that you don't foresee. And you're in that spot where the energy's low, the realization of the vision seems further away and harder to see, and those teams become fractious. And it's understanding as a leader, how do we help people through that bit, through the grit zone, the last 10%, which is so hard, to get to the top of that mountain and achieve things, and then thinking about what does that look like when the next mountain comes, because you can't go through that and straight on to the next one. So what does it mean for actually leading your teams? What are they going to need, and what are we going to need to sustain people to do the really important goals that we have, to achieve those things for our organization and our team. And then, so that's the leadership piece, right? Understanding what are the normal impacts of all of that on our teams? What are the things we're likely to see? And what is that going to require of us as a leader? And then secondly, thinking, how do we get our teams to step up to the responsibility they have for each other? And how do we make sure we equip them with what they need so they know how to do that really easily? And then the third piece, and I'm talking that triple responsibility again, is making sure people have the tools at the individual level to do the things they need to do to look after themselves through all of that, so that we can put all three of those pieces in play, and it's not sitting just on a leader's shoulders. It sounds harder than it is, honestly, I promise. A big part of our design challenge over the last 10 years is, how do we make that easy? How do we make that easy for leaders? What are the things that they can take and use and do? And how do we make that easy for teams? What are the conversations they need to have? And how do we make that really easy with tools for individuals? Yeah, I know it's not an easy thing. We've been leaders in a difficult situation. So it's like, we know leaders have got enough on. We've got to make this really easy for them.
Well, now it's a perfect tee up. You got to give an example. Give an example of one of the things that you do, because I get the concept, I get it in theory, understand the three buckets that you're talking about. So what's a great example of one of the things that you do?
Yeah, so we've got workshops that take leaders through, okay, what are the things that you need to know and understand as you go, taking a team up that grit mountain. So what are the things going to help get there? And it's often in that point when everybody's tired that we become very focused on the tasks, right? We're just grinding at that point. And it's then as a leader that we really need to be clear about, well, what is everything that people are doing right now contributes to the bigger goal, the bigger vision. And it's not there at that point that we often remember to make that clear. So our vision and our goal and why we are doing what we're doing becomes even more important. So to give you an example, in Christchurch, you had the horizontal infrastructure. Remember, I talked about all of that, the roads, the bridges, the pipes. 75% of the city impacted. So it meant that you couldn't even rebuild the buildings for a lot of the areas until those things were sorted first. So, and that's, where do you even start on a scale like that, where you don't have enough resources and you're pulling together resources in a really scrappy way, in a really interesting way, across a whole lot of organizations, having to work collaboratively with organizations that usually compete. So there was this got to compete, but also collaborate. So all sorts of interesting dynamics going on. And knowing that they had to find a way to sustain people, that this was going to be a really hard, long project. One of the things those engineers did, and we worked really closely with them, was to really get focused on the actual goal and the vision. right? Especially when things got really tough. And so for them, that goal and vision was, this isn't about replacing the pipes. This isn't about replacing the roads. I mean, our project plans all look like that. But at the end of the day, this is a people project. This is about returning a community. This is about the function for them. It's not a pipes and roads project. This is a people project. And so they were very clear about painting that vision, and pulling people through that grit zone with that bigger vision that people could buy into when they were tired. So there's one example. Another example at the team level is thinking about, how well do we really know what each of us needs under pressure? So Kyle, when the pressure's really on, what does that look like for you? You know, maybe you get snappy. Maybe you kind of like are normally quite a jokester and you get really quiet, right? Like, what are the things each of us probably look a bit different? And when we see that as your teammates, acknowledging, and we've got to have this conversation around stress, where if you're human, you're going to hit those points, right? This isn't I've had people say, I don't get stressed. And then their team will kind of go, didn't you just have a triple bypass, or that intervention where your friends, whatever. So, acknowledging that we all hit that stress point and that overload point, and what does that look like for each of us in a team? And then what do we need from our teammates when we notice that in each other? So, Kyle, you might need space. Jon, you might need a joke and distraction. But we often get it wrong by applying the thing that's helpful to us to someone else, and that just makes it worse. So just having those really simple conversations in a team around, so if you're seeing that I'm getting a bit quiet, maybe I just need a bit of space, right? Don't come at me with 3 more things to do today, or just knowing that about each other. And we start to be much more aware around, as teammates, how we can support each other in a way that's helpful.
So you're talking about some very human-centric conversations. When you get stressed, what happens? What do you do? How's your behavior change? How do your interactions change? And then the important question I heard was, what do you need to do to recharge? What do you need to do to get back to a level of functioning that's not, like Jon, you were saying before, where you're not constantly under the water?
Absolutely. So there's that individual piece. What do you need, but also what do you need from your teammates, or not need, right? Like, I might be, or I might be, hey, a hug would be great. And honestly, I'm married to an engineer. Hug him under pressure, that's not a good idea, right? So it's just kind of knowing those things too around each other really helps in a team.
Let the computer program finish its sequence and then you can talk.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's amazing how we miss the opportunity regularly to have this conversation. What do you all need, and what do you need from us? And then being respectful of that. What you may need may completely be different than what someone else needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And recognize, but we try so hard, and I'll go back and pick on the wellness programs again. We try so hard to fix all that stuff into one little box.
Yes.
The one size fits all for everybody. Sure, everyone should just take a breath and walk around the office for 5 minutes. Okay, good job. You get 5 points towards your goal and moving on.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's not really what we all need, but okay.
No, and that was a big part of our struggle, right? You've got things that are either a one size fits all approach, or they just do not really reflect the kind of pressured environment you're working in, where performance is a thing, right? We have to get things done. So it's not just about stopping and resting and recharging. We have to do that. It's important we do that strategically, but understanding the connection between well-being and performance, right? Those two things go together. We can't perform in the long run in a way that is sustainable, and we can't kick those big goals unless we think about the well-being of our people. But it's not well-being equals stopping, resting, recharging, or in a way that impacts performance. It's the two things have to go hand in hand, and we have to recognize that as humans, we all are impacted by stress at some point in some way, and what each of us needs might be different. And it's not just an individual thing; it's also a team and an organizational thing.
So many things rolling through my head all at the same time. I think it sounds really simple, right? Like, when do you on your team ever stop to say, it's a vulnerable conversation to a certain extent, to go, here's what you might see if I'm getting overwhelmed, and here's what I need from you, maybe to keep me from getting overwhelmed, but also to help me recover, right? Like, what an amazing conversation to be able to have with the team.
Yeah. And sometimes that takes a bit of building towards, right? Not every team's going to be comfortable having it. You might have to have that conversation a few times, right? And you've got to think about, what does that look like with your people? How do you have that conversation? Because, we call them blokes in New Zealand, right? We are rugby playing, pretty, you've got to have a bit of fun with that conversation sometimes and set it up well. Yeah. But it's an important one.
So you don't just get the closed off, arms crossed,
Yeah.
right?
That's the best challenge for me in a workshop. I love those people, because by the end of the day, we're going to have a lot of fun together. And by the end of the day, we had one guy in the fertilizer company that I was talking about who turned up. He was the arms crossed, leaning back, don't really want to be here kind of person, and by the end of the session, he said, can I come again to your one next week? He said, because maybe if I had learned some of these things earlier in my career or earlier in my life, maybe my marriage would still be intact, or maybe some things would have gone differently in my life. So, but you've got to find, we say this is really important, hard, tough stuff. But having those conversations and doing the work as a team around this stuff doesn't have to be difficult, doesn't have to be heavy. It's got to be fun. Like we try and bring the humor and levity to some of the stuff, because we don't need more heavy stuff when the pressure's on. Yeah, we can have some fun with it. We're not precious. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I like that idea too. We've kind of run across that, right? So we all, it could be even team. You get so task focused, right? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Is it the task, or how you took it? Is there a higher vision? So like, right, what if the thing we're trying to accomplish as a team of people is making sure each other is whole at the end of the duration that we're together?
Absolutely.
Right? The
Yeah.
day, the week, the project, whatever the case may be. And the task is just a side result. The task is the task, it's going to happen.
And honestly,
right?
No matter what you do, it's a people project, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're doing it for, you're building, constructing somebody, like who is the end goal? Who are the end people who are going to use it? Like, it's a people project. You're doing it for them. And to do this well, your greatest asset, your greatest tool, we're taught to look after our tools, right? Our greatest tool and our greatest asset is our people. And we want them to be in a really good space to be able to do great things, and to go home and safely. And safely means well in all respects.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So we've kind of like talked through some different pieces. I love the little strategies that, I mean, you're right. It's simple. It just takes some thought for how to go about these pieces and parts. So I'm trying to be conscious of time. I love our conversation, and I could just talk all day about this. How can people engage with you?
Yeah. So we have a website. It's hummingly.co. Yeah, or connect with me on LinkedIn. But yeah, we are always keen to help. We're all about supporting really good people, trying to achieve things that are hard, right? And so yeah, we're here to help wherever we can.
Was that the accent, or is it hummingly.co, not
.co.
.com?
It is .co.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Like
Just
Colorado.
sure. All right.
Yeah, it's quite fitting, really.
It absolutely is.
Yeah. Sorry for those outside Colorado. We're a little bit Colorado-centric group. We support you too.
Wherever you may be.
Yeah.
But you're definitely missing something. But don't come here. Don't stay. You don't want to live here. We got enough people. We're good.
Yeah, I'm one of those. Sorry about that.
You're here now. Now we can close the door.
There you go. So awesome. Well, Jolie, thank you for coming in and talking with us. This has been a great conversation, and I love the change in mindset. It certainly, gives me some positive things to take away and to go try. So I've been fascinated, from our conversations, and just love going through this for our listeners here today. So thank you very much.
No, I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate the focus you have on the people in your sector. It's just so important.
Absolutely.
Oh,
thank you. Appreciate you being here.
And listeners, thanks for joining us. You can connect, as Jolie mentioned. She has a website on LinkedIn. Reach out to Kyle and I on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to join us at one of our Ripple Intent events in person, check out our website, rippleintent.org. Go to the events page. We have a breakfast club in a town near you, or you can join us at our annual symposium. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
That's very sweet to consider some of the places where we have breakfast clubs as towns. I like that. At a town near you. Well said. Well said.
Exactly. It could be a city. I mean, a village. It could be a village too. I chose town. I thought that was very appropriate.
It very is. I'm gonna enjoy that as we go to the town of Baltimore. I'm gonna keep that in mind. I like it. See you on the next one.